What's up everyone? Welcome to the next lesson, Creative Upscalers, the laundry list. I'm super excited about this one. We are diving deep into examples of what AI is good at and where it falls flat. In some cases upscalers work brilliantly, in others it's a total miss. But there's also a lot of gray areas where you have a 50-50% chance that it will go well. And we've been experimenting with this over the past 2 years, and now we are eager to share our findings with you. Fun fact, all of the examples in this lesson are 3D renderings, most of them created by us. We've always loved tinkering in 3D, so we have a ton of various examples. And as always, we'll provide some wider context along the way. Let's get into it. Creative upscalers just add more quality. They add more fidelity, they add just more production value in general. It's undeniable. Once you add the layer of creative upscaler, it's like upgrading your entire scene with higher quality assets and bigger resolution textures. In this example, it's especially noticeable how the greenery gets more detailed on a sub-pixel level. You can see shimmering specular highlights, making it look more like a photo rather than CG. It's just next level. Here's another fantastic example of how creative upscalers can increase production value. If you ever tried rendering VDBs, you will know it's insanely hard to get that crispy look, especially around the edges. But now we get it for free. Razor sharp volumetric look. Another cool thing here is how we can improve all the scatter setups. It looks drier in some places and more overgrown in others. It immediately becomes very custom, which would cost too much time to set in 3D. Here's another example. I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening. Starting with all those dry trees which on a 3D level don't connect too convincingly with the terrain. After the upscaler, you can see how the sand overlaps with these elements. It's very meticulous. Next up, the sand dunes also get a lot of unique displacement, which in 3D is still a bit rigid. It also much improves the point where water meets the sand. This line is actually already enhanced in 3D. Fun fact, if you need to make that water-sand connection better, here's a nice 3D trick. First, add a little glossiness to the sand, making the sand appear wetter. But secondly, and not many people know this, add a little bump on the water surface. This simple bump on water can do the trick and break the CG look. Just make it appear as it's flowing on the shore. In this example, even though we have a really strong base in 3D, but after upscaling the difference is still there. We get a bit of that subsurface scattering effect in the pancakes, in the raspberries. We also get better honey simulation, especially in the areas around the spatula. With those micro glossy effects popping up here and there, we practically touch on hyperrealism. Okay, so again, it's undeniable that creative upscalers increase the quality of assets, textures, giving that additional production value, which is near impossible to implement in 3D. That's the first thing you need to keep in mind. The second idea is, creative upscalers work best with natural matter. The closer something is to nature, take people, animals, plants, rocks, the better the results. And the more man-made elements you throw in, the less likely you'll get to those ideal outcomes, but we'll talk about it later. Let's look at the rocks and moss, a classic challenge in 3D. Even if you try your hardest, it's not entirely convincing. After the upscaler, the moss just settles on the rock in a very realistic way. It also slightly shifts hues and saturations to really zone in on a perfect color. There's not much to criticize, AI pulls it off really brilliantly. Here, if we zoom into the window, we can see a lot of good things happening. After upscaling, all the moss-covered branches and various shrubs, they all look very lifelike. We don't need 100% pixel-perfect control over those parts, but I think it adds a lot. Here we have rocks and snow is pretty tricky to get right in 3D. A complex material with aspects like subsurface scattering where we have multi-scale and multi-layer displacement, and AI just improves everything across. However, in our test we noticed that AI often leans towards frozen ice rather than fluffy snow. That can benefit your scene or not, depending on the style you're aiming for. If you've been dealing with rocky terrains, you probably know most of the assets don't look that great, especially if you want them in the foreground. It's always a challenge to have high quality displacement and normals, and often these elements will consume as much RAM as you can give it.
But here, even some old dusty assets get that organic high-fidelity feeling. The result is much more detailed and realistic. Okay, another thing is of course animals and people. I think that's where upscales truly shine and deliver some of the most impressive gains. It can turn even the ugliest, low-poly people from like a 40-year-old video game into realistic models. And on top of that, it captures the natural memory color of the skin. Bear in mind though, if your characters have awkward body positions to start with, after upscaling, they will remain awkward, but realistic. But anyway, even with top-tier production assets like Anima or Humane 3D, which almost everyone uses, people might look unconvincing in close-ups. Fortunately, AI can overcome that uncanny element, giving us incredible realism virtually for free. One interesting detail is how AI often adds subtle rim lighting to hair, creating a studio-like lighting effect. That's a small touch but makes a huge difference. Another thing is, usually, 3D characters have no subsurface scattering, no custom hair, they look a bit plasticky in the rendering. But that's fine. After upscaler, we get exactly what's missing. We get some highlights on the faces, even on the hair. It also blends the people with the space, even picking up that bluish light from the scene. So it's definitely a big difference. Okay, animals. Animals are cool in images, but to be honest, we didn't include them too much in the past. Most available 3D assets are not great. They look like statues, especially if they don't have some sort of hair and fur modifier applied. However, upscalers handle this exceptionally well. They add things that we would never do in 3D in any universe. It finally looks realistic. However, be careful whenever dealing with animal upscaling. Animals are often in strange positions, and since they lack this layer of real fur, they are prone to having double ears or some dog little faces in unexpected areas. You will need to clean them up a bit in Photoshop, but it's all doable.
Okay, moving on, we have the idea of production value, we have the idea of improving the organic matter. The next one is creative upscalers work in one direction. AI works as a one-way street. When you think about it, AI always adds something to the image. We get more substance, gloss, fidelity, microtexture, bumps, and all that other stuff. It always takes a step forward, and that can be a blessing and a curse. So let me show you.
Take this example from a very old Evermotion scene. We have a very simple boxy architecture with a uniform material. Everything is super simplistic. And after applying the upscaler, we get a lot of additional details in every element. For instance, the glass, which started as a uniform color, now has nuanced reflections and variations, making it feel much less CG. The whole building also benefits. It now looks like it's actually made of concrete, with a realistic worn-out effect. And here's an example where the one-way street works brilliantly too. The upscaler adds a sense of wear and tear, giving that aged character to the walls. I think it's clearly visible on this wall and frame where the detail appears on multiple levels. Once the upscaler touches it, we get imperfections and cracks at the junction between plasters. What started as a very simple looking model now feels much more intricate and lifelike. But in a case like this, creative upscalers can do more harm than good. Just look at the wooden wall finish. It starts to suffer under the upscaler. Instead of clean, luxurious look, it picks up dirt and rustic feel. It suddenly turns from a world of luxury into something dirty, something unpleasant, something we definitely don't want in the space. Also, all the white walls and any slick finishes are getting those same one-way street dirt and damages. Sometimes you need to make a decision if you can use upscalers or not. On one hand, it does a great job of breaking up monotony in CG and enriching the environment. We get a bit of a local character from the grass, some parts are dried out, some are sparse, some are denser, but at the same time, it essentially can change the landscape project, which is the main focus in this example. In some places, it might be just too much.
Okay, that's the one-way street rule. Keep in mind, upscalers will almost certainly add more stuff on top of your renderings. Don't expect you can always use it. And I think it's a nice mental shortcut to keep in mind. Now, let's move on to something even more intricate. This might be or might not come as a surprise. But AI can actually work as a color grading tool. Not in a sense that it will actually do color correction, but it does some color adjustments.
Here's a clear example of AI acting as a color adjustment tool. Starting with a fog, which initially had a more toxic yellowish hue that suggested some kind of, pollution, after upscaling it, these shades become somewhat whiter and look more balanced and natural. The greens also undergo a subtle transformation. AI merges them into a cohesive mass. There's still a bit of nuance between different trees, but the greens are no longer all over the place. This example truly benefits from the color adjustment upscaling. We notice that there's a greater separation between the colors of the rocks and the greenery. It's not a uniform tint. It also slightly shifts the magenta color of the sky to a more typical memory color of the sky. These are all nuances, but the sum of small things brings us a step closer to a really refined, reduced and natural color palette.
If your eye is not that well trained to see these colors, AI can actually serve as a training tool. By analyzing the before and after changes, you can start to notice what shifted and think about why those adjustments improve the image. Next up is a simple idea, but that concept deserves some elaboration. Always stay alert when working with AI. You should approach it like driving a car, constantly aware of what's happening.
When working with architecture, it's hard for upscalers to maintain precision. It will keep improving the architecture on so many levels, in the materials, in the geometry and so on. Eventually, it will turn it into something else, probably something organic. This is a crop from a larger area, so the building doesn't have the highest resolution. And after upscaling, we get hallucinations everywhere. At the parking level, in the individual elements, the building essentially loses its facade character. Basically, only the main silhouette remains and the rest goes down the toilet. Glass is another tricky element for AI to handle and should immediately raise a red flag during your workflow. If we have glazing with very precise mullions, we can definitely expect something strange to happen there. The mullions get lost, misaligned, everything starts to blend together. Always keep an eye on these areas and ensure you have the control you need. The same caution goes for the reflection and refraction. AI often struggles to distinguish between what is meant to be a reflection and what's supposed to be visible behind the glass. Especially if we have double or triple window glazing, which, by the way, is really nice to have in 3D for that extra realism. And here again, those blurred reflections turn into a branch inside the house. This combination of interior and reflected exterior is a very shady ground for AI. Next thing are fabrics. They are kind of problematic elements too. Fabrics often require precise patterns or textures, specific choices made by the client, and it's very hard to maintain that. In this example, as a result, we completely lose the character of the fabric. Maybe it's just us, but AI often tends to turn them into concrete for some reason. It's something that happens very often. Here's a very funny example where AI even hallucinated some kind of a sandstone. Well, weird stuff. Upscalers also struggle with depth of field. If we have objects in shallow depth, it's almost laughable what can happen with it. It's a hallucination festival. AI very often looks for human and animal forms and for whatever reason keeps introducing them everywhere. Same weird behavior happens with motion blur. It will start adding details where there should be movement. Here it starts blending all surfaces together. Suddenly all the surfaces change, there's even water flowing down the lanes. Motion blur and depth of field are too hard for AI to deal with.
Okay, we are slowly driving this lesson home. I think it slowly settles in that there's two sides to working with AI. It can help a lot, but it often does a lot of harm. So as the last part, we want to talk about hallucinations. Sometimes they're absolutely hilarious in places you least expect.
AI can turn a guy in a wheelchair into a motorcycle. Weird thing is you wouldn't even notice since this is just a crop of a bigger image. In our commercial work, it also happened that people got replaced by, let's say, refrigerators. Both of those hallucinations are caused by so-called context bleeding. AI automatically generates a prompt, describes the image, and then looks for those things in the picture. If we have a kitchen, AI will look for kitchen-like things. So instead of succulents, we have some bottles. Instead of a person, there's this fridge and some glasses. Beyond just being visually jarring, this also alters the design itself. That fridge shouldn't even be there. This is just one big disaster. Another caution: be mindful of furry things or anything that appears to have hair and fur-like textures. Like here, for example. We should have very specific flowers, and of course AI tends to find various animal faces there. Animals on a stick are not what we want to see in our visualizations.
Now, before we wrap it all up, we want to say one more thing at the end. Not all hallucinations are equally bad. There will be many situations where we actually want to exploit these hallucinations. And I don't mean you want to put weird stuff in your images, but I'm talking about deliberately guiding AI to hallucinate something that's actually useful. Let me give you just a quick spoiler.
We can force it to hallucinate lights inside houses and offices. That's incredibly useful when you need to change a backplate and you don't want to pay for additional photoshoots. Here's an extreme case that we will develop further in the future lesson. Our 3D output, without revealing why it looks the way it does, will be literally transformed to the right image. We will be hallucinating entire patches of terrain, water, and sand beach. This is just a teaser of what's to come later in the training, so stay tuned, it's going to be exciting. And the last little spoiler for today, the final image of this masterclass. We'll use hallucinations to our advantage in this one. We'll even try to implement some logic behind hallucination, but that's all to come. Very exciting stuff.
That said, we hope all these tests gave you some perspective on the subject. AI can improve some things, but at the same time you still need to take care of many things in 3D as well. If you want your images to look next level, you still need a high level of realism in 3D in the first place. Nothing really comes for free. So thanks and see you in the next one.